The sun was shining brightly over the historic city, casting golden rays on its ancient buildings and narrow streets. Tourists from all corners of the world wandered around, their cameras clicking away as they tried to capture every little detail of the place's timeless charm. Among them was Alex, a young man in his mid-twenties with an adventurous spirit and a knack for making impulsive decisions. This trip had been a dream of his for years, a chance to explore a city steeped in history and culture, where stories of kings, queens, and grand ceremonies still echoed through the air. As Alex strolled down the cobblestone streets, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The towering statues of past rulers stood proudly along the sidewalks, and the sound of distant footsteps seemed to blend seamlessly with the whispers of history. But nothing prepared him for what awaited just ahead. The palace gates. It was a sight that took his breath away. Majestic arches framed the entrance, and standing guard at the gates were members of the royal guard. Tall, imposing figures dressed in striking uniforms that seemed straight out of a storybook. Their hats gleamed under the sunlight, and their boots shone like mirrors. What caught Alex's eye, however, were the horses. These weren't ordinary horses. They were magnificent creatures, perfectly groomed and radiating elegance. Each one stood tall and proud beside its rider, exuding strength and grace. Their coats shimmered in shades of chestnut and black, and their manes looked like they'd been brushed until not a single strand was out of place. The bond between the guards and their horses was evident. They moved together as though connected by an invisible thread, each step synchronized and deliberate. Alex stopped in his tracks, mesmerized. He'd seen pictures of these horses online before, but seeing them up close felt surreal. Around him, other tourists gathered eagerly, snapping photos and marveling at the display. Some even asked the guards politely if they could take selfies nearby. The guards remained stoic, their expressions unwavering despite the attention. They didn't smile or frown. They simply stood there, embodying discipline and tradition. For Alex, though, something else stirred inside him. A thought began forming in his mind, a reckless idea that grew stronger with each passing second. What if he could get closer? Not just stand near the horses, but actually sit on one. Just for a moment. Just long enough to snap a picture. It would be hilarious, wouldn't it? Something his friends back home would laugh about for years. An image of himself atop one of those majestic animals flashed in his mind, and he grinned at the thought. Sure, it might ruffle some feathers, but how bad could it really be? After all, everyone else was taking pictures too. How different could this be? As Alex lingered there, watching the scene unfold, he noticed how relaxed things seemed. The guards didn't appear overly strict. Not once did they raise their voices or chase anyone away. Even the horses looked calm, occasionally flicking their tails or shifting their weight, but otherwise content. To Alex, it almost felt like an invitation, an unspoken permission slip dangling right in front of him. All he had to do was reach out and grab it. Little did he know, that simple decision would lead to consequences far greater than anything he could have imagined. Alex's heart raced as he stood there, torn between excitement and hesitation. The idea of climbing onto one of those royal horses had taken root in his mind, and now it was growing into something he couldn't ignore. His friends, who were with him, noticed the mischievous glint in his eyes. At first, they laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "You wouldn't dare," one of them said, shaking their head. But Alex wasn't backing down. He thrived on spontaneity, always chasing the next thrill, and this felt like the perfect opportunity to do something unforgettable. "Why not?" Alex replied with a grin, trying to sound confident despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. "It's just for a second. No one will even notice." His friends exchanged glances, unsure whether to encourage him or talk him out of it. Some egged him on, teasingly chanting, "Do it, do it," while others warned him that it might be a bad idea. But Alex didn't listen. In his mind, he was already envisioning the photo, him sitting tall on the horse, looking like some kind of modern-day prince. It would get hundreds of likes on social media, maybe even go viral. The thought made him feel invincible, like nothing could go wrong. Taking a deep breath, Alex edged closer to the nearest horse. The animal stood quietly beside its rider, seemingly unfazed by the crowd of tourists snapping photos nearby. Alex reached out cautiously, patting the horse's neck to test its reaction. The horse flicked its ear, but otherwise didn't move, giving Alex the reassurance he needed to push forward. He glanced around, half expecting someone to stop him, but no one did. The guards remained still, their focus fixed ahead, as if carved from stone. To Alex, this silence felt like permission, like the universe was telling him to go for it. His confidence grew with every step. "See, totally fine," he muttered under his breath, more to convince himself than anyone else. With a quick look over his shoulder at his cheering friends, he swung his leg over the saddle and hoisted himself up. For a split second, everything seemed okay. He adjusted his position, straightened his back, and flashed a thumbs up toward his friends, who were laughing and recording the moment on their phones. Alex felt triumphant, like he'd just achieved something incredible. But then, reality hit. As soon as Alex settled onto the horse's back, the animal shifted uneasily beneath him. Its ears twitched, and it let out a soft snort, clearly uncomfortable with the unfamiliar weight. Alex froze, suddenly realizing how high off the ground he was. The horse took a tentative step forward, and Alex gripped the saddle tightly, his earlier bravado melting away. Panic bubbled up inside him as he realized he had no idea how to control the massive creature beneath him. What had seemed like a harmless prank moments ago now felt dangerously reckless. Nearby, one of the guards snapped to attention, his sharp gaze locking onto Alex. A low, commanding voice cut through the air, barking an order that Alex couldn't understand but instinctively knew was directed at him. The tone sent chills down his spine, breaking through the haze of adrenaline. His friends stopped laughing, their expressions shifting from amusement to concern. Alex wanted to climb off immediately, but fear rooted him to the spot. The horse, sensing his tension, began to move more restlessly, pawing at the ground and tossing its head. As the seconds ticked by, Alex's initial excitement turned into sheer dread. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't thought about what might happen if things went wrong. All he'd wanted was a silly photo, a memory to share with his friends. But now he was trapped in a situation spiraling out of control. The once friendly atmosphere around him had transformed into something tense and uneasy. People stopped taking pictures and started watching, their murmurs filling the air. Alex's face flushed red as he became the center of unwanted attention, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear anything else. In that moment, Alex realized he'd made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to turn back. The scene unfolded with alarming speed, each moment stretching longer than the last. Alex sat frozen on the horse's back, gripping the saddle tightly as the animal shifted beneath him. Its restless movements grew more pronounced. First a shuffle of its hooves, then a nervous toss of its head. The once calm atmosphere around the palace gates dissolved into chaos. Tourists who had been casually snapping photos moments ago now backed away, their expressions shifting from amusement to concern. Some pointed at Alex, whispering anxiously, while others pulled out their phones to record the unfolding drama. One of the nearby guards stepped forward, his polished boots clicking sharply against the cobblestones. His voice cut through the murmurs like a blade, commanding and authoritative. Though Alex didn't understand the exact words, the tone left no room for misinterpretation. This was not okay. The guard's eyes locked onto Alex, his expression stern and unyielding. For the first time since climbing onto the horse, Alex felt truly afraid. The playful grin he'd worn just moments ago vanished, replaced by wide-eyed panic. But before anyone could intervene further, the horse reacted. Startled by the commotion and Alex's awkward posture, it began to trot forward. Each step jolted Alex, who clung desperately to the saddle, his knuckles white. His friends, who had initially cheered him on, now shouted warnings, their voices laced with fear. "Get off!" One of them yelled, waving their arms frantically. Another called out, "Stop moving. You're scaring it." But Alex couldn't think straight. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Should he jump off? Stay put? Try to calm the horse? Nothing seemed like the right choice. The horse picked up its pace, trotting in uneven strides as Alex bounced uncomfortably on its back. He tried pulling on the reins, hoping to slow it down, but his clumsy attempts only made things worse. The horse snorted loudly, tossing its head again, and Alex realized he was completely out of his depth. This wasn't some theme park pony ride. This was a powerful, highly trained animal that clearly did not appreciate having an uninvited rider. As the horse moved farther away from the group, the senior guard sprang into action. With practiced precision, he signaled to his fellow guards, barking commands that brought immediate order to the situation. Two other mounted guards maneuvered their own horses closer, attempting to corral the runaway animal without causing additional stress. Meanwhile, the senior guard dismounted swiftly, his movements fluid and deliberate. He approached the horse cautiously, speaking in low, soothing tones meant to calm both the animal and Alex. Alex, meanwhile, was clinging on for dear life. Every bounce sent waves of terror through him, and he could feel sweat trickling down his forehead despite the cool breeze. His earlier confidence had evaporated entirely, leaving behind only regret and fear. Why had he thought this was a good idea? What had possessed him to climb onto a royal guard's horse in the first place? These questions swirled in his mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. All he could focus on was staying seated and praying that someone would stop the horse soon. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the senior guard managed to get close enough to grab hold of the reins. With firm yet gentle guidance, he coaxed the horse to a halt. Alex, still perched awkwardly on the saddle, let out a shaky breath of relief. His body trembled as adrenaline coursed through him, and he realized how close he had come to disaster. If the horse had bolted or bucked, he could have been seriously injured, or worse. The crowd that had gathered watched silently, their earlier excitement replaced by stunned disbelief. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every detail of the incident, but no one dared to speak. Even Alex's friends stood quietly, their faces pale with worry. As the senior guard steadied the horse, he turned his attention to Alex, his piercing gaze locking onto the young man. There was no anger in his expression, just a cold, professional determination. Whatever happened next, Alex knew he was in serious trouble. The moment the horse came to a halt, Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him. But it was short-lived. His heart was still pounding, and his hands trembled as he gripped the saddle, unsure of what to do next. The senior guard who had taken control of the situation now stood beside the horse, his presence commanding and intimidating. Without saying a word, he reached up and firmly guided Alex off the saddle. Alex stumbled as his feet hit the ground, his legs wobbly from the adrenaline rush and the unfamiliar sensation of being on horseback. Once Alex was back on solid ground, the guard stepped closer, towering over him. His uniform seemed even more imposing up close, every detail, from the gleaming buttons to the perfectly pressed fabric, screaming authority. For a few seconds, there was silence. The only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant chatter of tourists watching nervously from afar. Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry, as he met the guard's unyielding gaze. He wanted to say something, anything, to explain himself or apologize, but no words came out. Instead, he just stood there, red-faced and humiliated. Finally, the guard spoke. His voice was low and measured, each word carrying weight. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked, his tone sharp yet controlled. Alex shook his head slowly, too overwhelmed to respond. The guard didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he launched into an explanation, his words cutting through Alex's haze of panic like a knife. "These horses," the guard began, gesturing toward the animal that had just been calmed, "are not toys. They are highly trained companions of the Royal Guard, bred and raised specifically for their role in ceremonial duties. Every movement they make, every step they take, is part of a tradition that spans centuries. And you thought it would be funny to climb onto one without permission." Alex winced at the accusation, guilt washing over him. The guard wasn't yelling, but the calm intensity of his voice made the reprimand sting even more. "This isn't just about disrespecting a horse," the guard continued. "It's about understanding boundaries. These animals are trusted with protecting our nation's most sacred events. When you act recklessly, you put yourself, the horse, and everyone around you at risk." As the guard spoke, Alex felt smaller and smaller. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was shame. He realized how selfish and thoughtless his actions had been. All he'd wanted was a silly photo, a fleeting moment of fun. But he hadn't stopped to consider the bigger picture. To him, the horse had seemed like nothing more than a prop, something to enhance his social media feed. But to the guards, these animals were partners, symbols of pride and duty. The senior guard signaled to another officer nearby, who quickly moved to secure the horse and lead it away from the crowd. Then, turning back to Alex, he said, "Come with me." There was no room for argument in his tone, so Alex nodded silently and followed. As they walked away from the main gates and toward a quieter area near the palace walls, Alex noticed the stares of the onlookers. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental, but all of them were watching him. He kept his eyes down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. When they reached the secluded spot, the guard stopped and turned to face Alex again. This time, his expression softened slightly, though his demeanor remained stern. "Let me make one thing clear," he said. "What you did today is not just frowned upon. It's against the law. Unauthorized interference with a royal guard's equipment, including their horses, carries serious consequences. Do you understand?" Alex nodded quickly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." The guard studied him for a moment, then sighed. "I believe you didn't intend harm, but intentions don't change the outcome. You need to take responsibility for your actions. That starts now." With that, he motioned for Alex to stay put while he radioed for additional assistance. As Alex stood there, alone with his thoughts, the full weight of what he'd done began to sink in. This wasn't going to end with a simple apology. It was going to cost him far more than he ever imagined. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Within minutes, it seemed as though everyone in the vicinity of the palace gates knew what had happened. Tourists who had witnessed the chaotic scene quickly shared their accounts with others, some even posting videos online before Alex could fully process the gravity of his actions. The guards, meanwhile, worked efficiently to restore order, ushering people back to safer distances while keeping a close eye on Alex. He remained in the secluded area near the palace walls, feeling more exposed than ever despite being out of the public's direct view. It wasn't long before additional authorities arrived, local law enforcement officers who were briefed on the situation by the senior guard. They approached Alex with professional detachment, their expressions neutral but firm. One of them carried a clipboard and began asking questions. Who was he? Where was he from? Did he understand the seriousness of his actions? Each question felt like another weight pressing down on him. Alex answered as honestly as he could, his voice trembling slightly as he explained that he hadn't meant any harm. I thought it would be funny," he admitted, his cheeks burning with shame. The officers exchanged glances, clearly unimpressed by his explanation. "Funny doesn't excuse breaking the rules," one of them said bluntly. "These horses are part of an important tradition. What you did today isn't just disrespectful, it's illegal." They went on to explain that riding or interfering with a royal guard's horse without permission was considered a violation of local laws designed to protect both ceremonial duties and public safety. Depending on the severity of the offense, penalties could range from hefty fines to community service, or worse. As the reality of the situation sank in, Alex felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: guilt, fear, and regret. He glanced around, hoping for some kind of reprieve, but there was none. His friends, who had been watching nervously from afar, were now being questioned separately. Some of them tried to defend him, insisting that he hadn't meant any real harm, but the authorities weren't swayed. Intentions don't negate consequences, one officer reminded them firmly. To make matters worse, news outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Someone in the crowd had uploaded footage of Alex atop the horse to social media, where it quickly gained traction. Headlines like "Tourist Causes Chaos at Palace Gates" and "Man Rides Royal Guard Horse in Shocking Stunt" began circulating online. Comment sections erupted with reactions ranging from outrage to mockery. Some criticized Alex for his blatant disregard for cultural traditions, while others joked about his misfortune. By the time he returned to his hotel later that evening, his phone was flooded with notifications, messages from friends, family, and acquaintances who had seen the viral posts. Back at the palace, the senior guard took a moment to address the gathered tourists, assuring them that such incidents were rare and emphasizing the importance of respecting ceremonial protocols. His words carried authority, and the crowd listened attentively, many nodding in agreement. Meanwhile, Alex sat silently in the backseat of a police car, escorted to a nearby station for further questioning. The ride was quiet except for the hum of the engine, but his mind was anything but calm. He replayed the events of the day over and over in his head, each memory amplifying his regret. At the station, formal charges were filed against him. Fines were issued, and he was informed that he would need to appear in court for a hearing to determine if additional penalties were necessary. The officers also confiscated his passport temporarily, ensuring he wouldn't leave the country before addressing the legal ramifications of his actions. As Alex signed documents and listened to the details of his case, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. This wasn't how his trip was supposed to go. He'd come seeking adventure, but instead, he found himself entangled in a mess of his own making. By the time he was allowed to leave the station, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the city streets. Alex walked slowly back to his hotel, his head bowed and his shoulders slumped. Every step felt heavier than the last, not just because of exhaustion, but because of the burden of knowing he had let himself, and countless others, down. The vibrant energy of the city that had once thrilled him now felt distant, almost mocking. For the first time in his life, Alex truly understood what it meant to face the consequences of a reckless decision. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The days following the incident were a blur for Alex, filled with sleepless nights and endless self-reflection. The court hearing loomed over him like a storm cloud, casting a shadow on everything he did. Each morning, he woke up dreading what might come next. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, messages from friends back home, updates on the viral video, and even comments from strangers who had seen his face plastered across news outlets. Some people criticized him harshly, calling him disrespectful and reckless, while others mocked him with memes and jokes. It was hard to tell which stung more, the anger or the ridicule. At first, Alex tried to ignore it all. He turned off his phone, avoided social media, and stayed cooped up in his hotel room. But no matter how much he tried to shut out the world, the weight of his actions pressed down on him. He replayed the moment he climbed onto the horse over and over in his mind, dissecting every detail. What had he been thinking? Why hadn't he listened to his gut when it told him this was a bad idea? The answers eluded him, leaving only regret in their place. Determined to make things right, Alex decided to take responsibility, not just legally, but personally. He reached out to the palace administration, writing a heartfelt letter of apology. In it, he explained that he hadn't intended to cause harm or disrespect anyone. He admitted that his actions stemmed from ignorance and poor judgment, not malice. "I failed to recognize the significance of your traditions," he wrote. "And for that, I am deeply sorry." He also offered to do whatever was necessary to make amends, whether that meant paying additional fines, performing community service, or speaking publicly about the importance of respecting cultural boundaries. To his surprise, the palace responded. A formal meeting was arranged, during which Alex met with representatives of the royal guard and local officials. They listened as he expressed his remorse, their expressions unreadable at first. Then one of them, the same senior guard who had confronted him after the incident, spoke up. "Apologies are easy to give," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "What matters is what you do next. Actions speak louder than words." The senior guard went on to explain the role of the horses in ceremonial duties and why they were so highly regarded. He described the years of training each animal underwent, the bond between the guards and their mounts, and the centuries-old traditions that these horses represented. As Alex listened, he realized how little he had understood before. To him, the horse had seemed like nothing more than a majestic creature to admire. But to the guards, it was a symbol of honor, discipline, and national pride. Hearing this firsthand made Alex's heart sink further. How could he have been so blind? By the end of the meeting, the representatives agreed to accept his apology under one condition: that Alex use his platform to educate others about the importance of respecting cultural traditions. They suggested he write an article or record a video sharing his experience and the lessons he had learned. At first, the idea terrified him. Facing public scrutiny again felt like the last thing he wanted to do. But as he thought about it, he realized it was the least he could do. If his story could prevent someone else from making the same mistake, then maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't all be for nothing. In the weeks that followed, Alex threw himself into fulfilling this commitment. He worked closely with the palace representatives to ensure his message was clear and respectful. When the article was finally published, it received mixed reactions. Some praised him for owning up to his mistakes, while others remained skeptical, accusing him of seeking attention. But Alex didn't care about the backlash anymore. For the first time since the incident, he felt a small sense of peace. He had taken responsibility, learned from his errors, and tried to turn a negative situation into something positive. Still, the consequences of his actions lingered. The fine he paid was steep, and the restrictions placed on his travel plans served as constant reminders of the price he had paid. Yet through it all, Alex knew he had grown. The carefree, impulsive young man who had arrived in the city weeks earlier was gone, replaced by someone wiser and more mindful of the impact his choices could have. Though the road ahead would be challenging, he vowed to carry these lessons with him wherever he went. As the weeks turned into months, Alex found himself reflecting deeply on everything that had happened. The incident with the Royal Guard's horse wasn't just a fleeting moment of embarrassment. It was a turning point in his life. Back home, he faced questions from friends and family, each conversation forcing him to confront his actions anew. Some people teased him lightly, brushing off the event as a funny story to share at parties. Others were more serious, asking why he had done something so reckless and what he had learned from it. Every time someone brought it up, Alex felt a pang of guilt, but he also saw it as an opportunity to explain how much the experience had changed him. One of the biggest changes in Alex was his newfound awareness of cultural sensitivity. Before this trip, he had always thought of travel as a chance to have fun, to see new places, try exciting activities, and collect Instagram-worthy photos. But now, he understood that traveling came with responsibilities too. It wasn't just about enjoying yourself. It was about respecting the traditions, values, and rules of the places you visited. He realized that every destination had its own unique history and significance, and treating those things casually could unintentionally cause harm or offense. This realization hit him hardest when he remembered standing near the palace gates, completely oblivious to the weight of what he was doing. That ignorance felt foreign to him now. To solidify these lessons, Alex began making small but meaningful changes in his daily life. He started reading more about different cultures, watching documentaries, and listening to podcasts that explored global traditions. When planning future trips, he made it a point to research local customs beforehand, ensuring he wouldn't make the same kind of mistake again. He even joined online forums where travelers shared tips and stories about navigating unfamiliar environments respectfully. These efforts weren't just for show. They were part of his commitment to becoming a better, more thoughtful person. His article, which detailed his experience and the lessons he had learned, played a significant role in helping him process everything. Writing it forced him to articulate his thoughts clearly and honestly, and sharing it publicly felt like closing a chapter he had been afraid to revisit. To his surprise, the piece resonated with many readers. Some commented that they had never considered the importance of respecting ceremonial animals before, while others admitted they had acted impulsively during their own travels and appreciated Alex's candor. A few teachers even reached out, saying they planned to use his story as a teaching tool for students studying cultural awareness. Despite the positive feedback, Alex knew he couldn't undo the past. The viral video of him atop the horse still existed, and occasional reminders of the incident popped up online. Sometimes, scrolling through social media late at night, he would stumble across memes or comments mocking him. At first, these moments stung, but over time, he learned to let them go. He reminded himself that everyone makes mistakes, and what truly mattered was how you grew from them. Instead of dwelling on the negativity, he focused on the progress he had made since that fateful day. Even his relationships with his friends evolved. In the past, they had often encouraged his impulsive behavior, egging him on for laughs or entertainment. Now they seemed to understand the importance of thinking before acting. On group outings, they joked less about risky stunts and more about finding meaningful ways to engage with the world around them. One friend even told Alex that hearing his story had inspired her to be more mindful during her own travels. Knowing that his experience had sparked change in others gave Alex a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. By the time the court proceedings concluded and the final fines were paid, Alex felt ready to move forward. The financial burden had been heavy, and the restrictions on his travel plans frustrating, but none of that compared to the emotional toll of carrying such a public mistake. Yet through it all, he had emerged stronger and wiser. He no longer saw himself as the carefree adventurer who prioritized thrills over thoughtfulness. Instead, he viewed himself as someone capable of growth, someone willing to learn from failure and strive to do better. Though the memory of riding the Royal Guard's horse would always linger, it no longer haunted him. Instead, it served as a constant reminder of the lessons he had learned: humility, respect, and accountability. And as he looked ahead to future adventures, Alex carried those lessons with him, determined to approach the world with a deeper sense of responsibility and gratitude. Months after the incident, Alex found himself back in his hometown, sitting on a park bench with a cup of coffee in hand. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and children laughed as they chased each other across the grass. It was a peaceful scene, far removed from the chaos he had caused halfway around the world. Yet the memory of that day at the palace gates still lingered in his mind, not as a source of shame anymore, but as a story of growth and transformation. Alex had become more open about sharing his experience with others. Whether it was during casual conversations with friends or formal presentations at community events, he spoke candidly about what had happened and how it had changed him. People were often surprised by his honesty. Many expected him to shy away from the topic, given how widely publicized the incident had been. But Alex didn't see any reason to hide. "Mistakes happen," he would say with a shrug. "What matters is what you do after." One evening, while volunteering at a local cultural center, Alex gave a talk to a group of high school students who were preparing for an international exchange program. The theme of the session was responsible travel, and Alex had been invited to share his perspective. Standing in front of the eager teenagers, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He began by recounting the events of that fateful day. The thrill of seeing the Royal Guard's horses, the impulsive decision to climb onto one, and the whirlwind of consequences that followed. As he spoke, he noticed the students leaning forward, their eyes wide with curiosity. "I thought I was just having fun," Alex admitted, pausing to let his words sink in. "But I wasn't thinking about how my actions might affect others. Those horses weren't just animals. They were part of something much bigger than me. And when I ignored that, I hurt not only myself, but also the people whose traditions I disrespected." He went on to explain the importance of understanding cultural contexts before visiting new places. "Do your research," he urged them. "Ask questions. Be respectful. Don't assume that what seems okay to you will feel the same way to someone else." The students listened intently, nodding along as Alex shared practical tips for responsible travel. Learning basic phrases in the local language, dressing appropriately for different settings, and always asking permission before taking photos of people or sacred sites. When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Several students approached him afterward, thanking him for his honesty and insight. One girl even told him she had planned to ride an elephant during her upcoming trip to Southeast Asia, but now wanted to reconsider after hearing his story. That moment stayed with Alex. It reminded him that his experience, though painful, could inspire positive change in others. Back home, Alex continued to embrace the lessons he had learned. His travels became less about ticking items off a bucket list and more about connecting with the places he visited. On a recent trip to a small coastal town, he spent hours talking to locals about their history and traditions, instead of rushing to snap pictures of landmarks. He joined a cooking class where villagers taught him how to prepare traditional dishes, laughing together as he struggled to master the techniques. These moments felt richer and more fulfilling than anything he had experienced before. Even his friendships had deepened. His old crew still joked around, but their adventures now carried a sense of mindfulness. They no longer sought out risky stunts for social media clout. Instead, they focused on creating memories rooted in respect and appreciation. One weekend, they volunteered to clean up a nearby hiking trail, turning what could have been a reckless escapade into something meaningful. Alex couldn't help but smile whenever he thought about how much they had all grown. As time passed, the sting of embarrassment faded further, replaced by gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance he had been given, for the people who had helped him learn from his mistakes, and for the opportunity to share his journey with others. Alex knew he would never forget the price he had paid for his recklessness, but he also knew it had been worth it. The man he was today was wiser, kinder, and more aware of the world around him. Sitting on that park bench, watching the golden sunlight filter through the trees, Alex allowed himself a quiet smile. Life had moved on, and so had he. The memory of riding the Royal Guard's horse would always be a part of him, a reminder of both his flaws and his capacity for growth. But now, instead of cringing at the thought of it, he saw it as proof that everyone has the power to change. And as he sipped his coffee and gazed at the horizon, Alex felt ready to face whatever adventures lay ahead, armed with humility, respect, and a renewed sense of purpose.